cold rain, a determined little girl, a detective known for solving the impossible. But when she asked, "Do you know my mom?" what happened next stunned everyone in the room. What secret did this child bring, and why did it strike the detective so deeply? Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The autumn rain fell in steady sheets against the cobblestones of Philadelphia, turning Chestnut Street into a mirror of gaslit reflections. Detective William Hartford stood beneath the awning of his modest office, watching the carriages navigate the slick thoroughfare with practiced caution. At 32 years of age, he had built a reputation as one of the city's most methodical investigators, known for his ability to uncover truths that others overlooked. His tall frame cast a long shadow in the doorway, and his dark eyes held the perpetual wariness of a man who had seen too much of humanity's darker inclinations. The year was 1898, and Philadelphia hummed with the restless energy of a new century approaching. Electric streetlights had begun replacing the old gas lamps in the wealthier districts, and the occasional motor car sputtered past, though horses remained the primary means of transport. William preferred the steadiness of horses to the unpredictable nature of those mechanical contraptions. There was something honest about a horse, something you could trust. He was about to retreat inside when a small figure emerged from the rain-soaked street. A girl, no more than 10 years old, stood at the edge of the sidewalk, her brown hair plastered to her pale cheeks, her thin dress offering little protection against the October chill. She clutched a worn leather satchel to her chest and stared up at the sign above his door with an intensity that seemed far too mature for her years. William stepped forward instinctively. "Child, you shouldn't be out in this weather. Where are your parents?" The girl's eyes, a striking shade of green that caught the lamplight, fixed on him with unwavering focus. "Are you Detective Hartford?" Her voice carried a surprising steadiness despite the chattering of her teeth. William nodded slowly, already reaching for his coat. "I am. But first, let's get you out of this rain before you catch your death." He ushered her inside, where a small stove radiated welcome warmth. His office was modest but well organized, with filing cabinets lining one wall and a sturdy oak desk positioned near the window. The scent of pipe tobacco and old leather filled the space. William quickly retrieved a blanket from the back room and draped it around the girl's shoulders. "Sit here by the stove," he instructed, pulling up a chair. "I'll make some tea." As the kettle heated, William studied his unexpected visitor. Despite her bedraggled appearance, there was something refined about her bearing, the way she held herself with quiet dignity. Her clothes, though soaked and worn, had once been of decent quality. The satchel she clutched bore intricate tooling along its edges, the kind of craftsmanship that spoke of wealth, or at least comfortable means. He prepared 2 cups of tea, adding extra sugar to hers before settling into the chair across from her. "Now then, what brings you to my office on such a dreadful evening? And what's your name?" The girl wrapped her small hands around the warm cup, and for the first time, a hint of vulnerability crossed her features. "My name is Catherine Rose Morrison. I'm from the St. Margaret's Orphanage on Walnut Street." William's expression softened. He knew St. Margaret's, a respectable institution run by the Sisters of Charity. "I see. And does the Mother Superior know you're here?" Catherine shook her head, drops of water falling from her hair. "No, sir. I waited until after supper and slipped out. I had to come. I need your help, Detective Hartford. Everyone says you're the best investigator in Philadelphia, that you solve cases the police can't manage." There was something in her earnestness that touched William deeply. He leaned forward, his voice gentle. "What kind of help do you need, Catherine?" The girl reached into her satchel with trembling fingers and withdrew a small photograph in a tarnished silver frame. She held it out to him with both hands, as though it were the most precious object in the world. William took it carefully, angling it toward the lamplight. The photograph showed a young woman, perhaps in her mid-20s, with delicate features and an elegant bearing. She wore a high-collared dress typical of the previous decade, and her hair was arranged in the fashionable Gibson girl style. But it was her eyes that captured William's attention, those same striking green eyes that gazed at him now from the face of the child before him. "This is my mother," Catherine said softly. "Her name was Margaret Rose Morrison. She died when I was 4 years old, 6 years ago, or at least, that's what they told me." William studied the photograph more closely, a peculiar sensation stirring in his chest. There was something hauntingly familiar about the woman's face, though he couldn't place where he might have seen her before. What do you mean? That's what they told you? Catherine set down her teacup and pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. 3 days ago, I was helping Sister Anne organize the storage room in the orphanage basement. We were sorting through old boxes of donated items when I found something hidden behind a loose board in the wall. She reached into her satchel again and produced a bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. The envelopes were yellowed with age, and the handwriting on them was elegant and flowing. William took them carefully, noting the dates on the postmarks, all from 1892, the year Catherine would have been born. These were addressed to my mother, Catherine continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. But they were never opened. Someone hid them there, Detective Hartford. Someone didn't want my mother to receive these letters. William untied the ribbon and examined the envelopes more closely. They bore the return address of a law firm in Boston, Whitfield and Associates. The firm name stirred a vague recognition in his memory, but he couldn't quite grasp why. Have you read them? He asked. Catherine nodded. Every single one. They're from a lawyer named Jonathan Whitfield. He was trying to reach my mother about an inheritance, a substantial estate left to her by her grandmother. But the letters never reached her, and according to what I've learned from the older sisters at the orphanage, my mother died believing she had nothing to leave me, that she was penniless and alone. William felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain outside. Catherine, these are serious allegations. Do you understand what you're suggesting? That someone deliberately intercepted these letters to prevent your mother from claiming her inheritance? The girl's green eyes blazed with fierce determination. I know exactly what I'm suggesting, Detective Hartford. Someone stole my mother's future, and possibly mine as well. I want to know who did it and why. I want to know if my mother really died of influenza, as they claim, or if there's more to the story. William rose and moved to the window, gazing out at the rain-slicked street as his mind worked through the implications. He had handled cases of fraud and deception before, but something about this situation felt different, more personal somehow. The image of the young woman in the photograph seemed to hover in his mind's eye. Those haunting green eyes holding secrets he suddenly felt compelled to uncover. Tell me about your mother, he said quietly, still facing the window. What do you remember of her? Catherine's voice grew soft, touched with the ache of loss that time had not fully healed. I remember her singing to me at night. She had the most beautiful voice, like a nightingale. She used to tell me stories about faraway places, about castles and gardens and grand adventures. I remember she always smelled of lavender, and her hands were so gentle when she brushed my hair. She paused, and William heard her breath catch slightly. But I also remember her sadness. Even as young as I was, I could feel it. She would stare out the window of our little room at the boarding house where we lived, and tears would run down her cheeks. She never complained, never spoke ill of anyone, but I knew she was carrying a great burden. William turned back to face her, his expression thoughtful. Do you know anything about your father? Catherine shook her head. My mother never spoke of him. The matron at the orphanage says there was no record of a father on my admission papers. It was as though he never existed. The detective returned to his chair and spread the unopened letters on his desk. Something about this case was pulling at him, awakening an instinct he had learned to trust over years of investigation. There were layers here, secrets buried beneath secrets, and at the center of it all was a young woman who had died too young and too alone. Catherine, I need to ask you something very important, William said, his tone serious. If I take this case, if I begin digging into your mother's past, we might uncover things that are difficult to hear. The truth isn't always what we hope it will be. Are you prepared for that? The girl met his gaze without flinching, and in that moment, William saw a strength of character that belied her tender years. I've spent 6 years wondering, Detective Hartford. 6 years with questions that no one could answer. Whatever the truth is, it has to be better than not knowing. My mother deserves to have her story told, and I deserve to know who I really am. William found himself nodding slowly, a decision crystallizing in his mind. Very well. I'll take your case, Catherine Rose Morrison, but we do this properly. First, I'm escorting you back to St. Margaret's. The sisters must be worried sick about you. Catherine's face fell slightly, but she nodded with understanding. Will you truly investigate? You're not just saying that to placate me. William reached across the desk and placed his hand gently on her small shoulder. I give you my word. Tomorrow I'll begin looking into these letters and your mother's history. But I need you to promise me something in return. No more running off alone. If you learn anything new, you come to me during proper hours with permission from the Mother Superior. Agreed?" A smile, the first he had seen from her, broke across Catherine's face. "Agreed, Detective Hartford, thank you. You don't know what this means to me." As William helped Catherine into his overcoat for the walk back to the orphanage, he caught sight of the photograph still lying on his desk. Those green eyes seemed to look straight through him, and he felt an inexplicable stirring in his chest, a sense that taking this case would change something fundamental in his carefully ordered life. The rain had lessened to a gentle drizzle as they stepped out into the night, and Catherine's small hand slipped trustingly into his as they began the walk toward Walnut Street. William found himself troubled by questions that went beyond the professional curiosity of an investigator. Who had Margaret Rose Morrison been? Why had someone gone to such lengths to hide those letters from her? And why did her image stir something in his memory that he couldn't quite grasp? The morning arrived with unexpected clarity, the storm having washed the city clean during the night. William Hartford stood in his office before dawn, the unopened letters spread across his desk like pieces of a puzzle waiting to be assembled. He had slept poorly, his dreams haunted by green eyes and unanswered questions. Now, with the first light of day streaming through his window, he was ready to begin unraveling the mystery that Catherine had laid at his feet. He carefully opened the first letter, dated March 15, 1892. The paper was of excellent quality, and the handwriting was precise and professional. As he read, a picture began to emerge that made his investigator's instincts sharpen with interest. "Dear Miss Morrison, I am writing on behalf of your late grandmother, Mrs. Helena Ashworth of Boston, Massachusetts. It is my duty to inform you that Mrs. Ashworth passed away on February 28, 1892, and has named you as the sole beneficiary of her estate. The inheritance includes a substantial property on Beacon Hill, as well as considerable financial assets. It is imperative that you contact this office at your earliest convenience to begin the necessary legal proceedings. Time is of the essence in these matters. Respectfully yours, Jonathan Whitfield, Attorney at Law." William set down the letter and reached for the next one, dated 2 weeks later. The tone was more urgent, expressing concern that the first letter had not been acknowledged. The third letter, written in early April, mentioned that the law firm had attempted to locate Miss Morrison through various channels, but had been unsuccessful. The final letter, dated April 30, 1892, stated that if no response was received within 30 days, the estate would be processed according to alternative provisions in Mrs. Ashworth's will. The detective leaned back in his chair, his mind working through the implications. Margaret Morrison had been living in Philadelphia in 1892, presumably with infant Catherine. Someone had intercepted these letters before they reached her, effectively stealing an inheritance that could have changed both their lives. But who had the means and the motive to commit such a crime? William pulled out a clean sheet of paper and began making notes. He needed to trace Margaret Morrison's movements in 1892, determine where she had been living, and identify who might have had access to her mail. He also needed to travel to Boston to speak with Jonathan Whitfield, if the attorney was still alive and practicing. Most importantly, he needed to learn more about Margaret herself, about the woman behind those haunting green eyes. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. William called out permission to enter and was surprised to see a young woman step into his office. She was perhaps 26 or 27 years old, dressed in a practical traveling suit of deep burgundy wool. Her chestnut hair was arranged in a neat chignon beneath a modest hat, and her brown eyes held an intelligence and determination that immediately commanded respect. She carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to handling difficult situations. "Detective Hartford?" she inquired, her voice clear and cultured. "I apologize for calling so early, but I was told you keep unusual hours." William rose and gestured to the chair across from his desk. "I do indeed. And you are?" The woman settled into the chair with graceful efficiency. "My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm a social reformer and advocate for orphaned children. I work closely with several institutions in Philadelphia, including St. Margaret's Orphanage. Mother Superior Teresa sent word to me last night about young Catherine Morrison's visit to your office." William felt a flicker of concern. "I escorted Catherine back to the orphanage safely. Is there a problem?" Evelyn shook her head, and a slight smile touched her lips. "Quite the contrary, Detective Hartford. Mother Superior wanted me to assure you of the orphanage's full cooperation in any investigation you might undertake on Catherine's behalf. That child has been asking questions about her mother for years, and it's time she had some answers." She paused, and her expression grew more serious. "But I also came here for another reason. You see, I knew Margaret Morrison." William felt his pulse quicken. He leaned forward, his full attention focused on his visitor. "You knew her? How?" Evelyn's eyes grew distant, as though looking back through the years. 6 years ago, I was volunteering at the boarding house where Margaret and Catherine were living. It was a respectable establishment on Pine Street, catering to working women and young families. Margaret was employed as a seamstress at Henderson's Fine Garments on Market Street. She was extraordinarily skilled with a needle, and her embroidery work was sought after by some of Philadelphia's wealthiest families. The young woman reached into her handbag and withdrew a small leather journal. I kept detailed records of my work with the residents. Margaret was reserved, intensely private, but there was a refinement about her that spoke of a better upbringing. She never discussed her past, and she seemed to carry a profound sadness with her always. William gestured toward the photograph still lying on his desk. "Catherine showed me this. Do you recognize the woman?" Evelyn picked up the frame and studied it carefully. "Yes, that's Margaret. This must have been taken before Catherine was born. She looks happier here than I ever saw her." She set down the photograph and met William's gaze directly. "Detective Hartford, I need to tell you something that has troubled me for 6 years. Margaret's death was attributed to influenza, but I was with her in her final days. She was ill, yes, but there was something else, something that frightened her deeply." William's hand stilled over his notepad. "What do you mean?" Evelyn chose her words carefully. 2 days before she died, Margaret received a visitor at the boarding house, a man well-dressed, carrying himself with authority. I didn't see his face clearly, but I heard raised voices from Margaret's room. After he left, I found her in tears, clutching Catherine to her chest. She wouldn't tell me what the man wanted, but she kept saying, "They've found me. After all these years, they've found me." A chill ran down William's spine. "Did you tell anyone about this? The police?" "I tried," Evelyn said, frustration evident in her voice. "But Margaret died the next day, and by the time I attempted to file a report, the authorities showed little interest. A poor seamstress dying of influenza during an outbreak was hardly noteworthy to them. The case was closed before it was ever truly opened." William stood and moved to the window, his mind racing through possibilities. "Miss Carter, I believe Margaret Morrison was hiding from someone, possibly her entire adult life. These letters I've discovered suggest she was the granddaughter of a wealthy Boston family. Someone prevented her from learning about her inheritance, and possibly someone found her just before her death." He turned back to Evelyn and was struck by the intensity of her expression. She had risen from her chair and stood before his desk, her hands clasped tightly together. "Then help Catherine find the truth, Detective Hartford. That little girl deserves to know her mother's story, and Margaret deserves justice if there was foul play involved." William found himself nodding, feeling a kinship with this woman who shared his commitment to uncovering the truth. "I intend to, Miss Carter, but I'll need assistance. Would you be willing to help with the investigation? Your knowledge of Margaret and your connections to the orphanage could prove invaluable." Evelyn's face lit with determination. "I was hoping you would ask. I've cleared my schedule for the next 2 weeks. Where do we begin?" Over the next hour, William and Evelyn formed a plan of action. They would start by visiting Henderson's Fine Garments, where Margaret had worked, to speak with anyone who remembered her. Then they would investigate the boarding house on Pine Street, searching for any records or witnesses who might recall the mysterious visitor. Finally, William would travel to Boston to meet with Jonathan Whitfield and learn more about the Ashworth family and the contested inheritance. As they prepared to leave the office, William found himself studying Evelyn Carter with growing appreciation. She was intelligent, capable, and shared his passion for justice. There was something compelling about her dedication to helping orphaned children, a warmth beneath her professional demeanor that drew him in despite his usual reserve. "Miss Carter," he said as they descended the stairs to the street, "may I ask what drove you to this work?" "Advocating for orphans requires not just compassion but considerable personal sacrifice." Evelyn adjusted her gloves, and for a moment vulnerability flickered across her features. "I was orphaned myself at 12 years old, Detective Hartford. I was fortunate enough to be taken in by a kind aunt who ensured I received an education, but I never forgot what it felt like to be alone and uncertain of my place in the world. If I can spare other children that pain, then my life has purpose. William felt a surge of respect and something deeper, something he hadn't experienced in years. He had dedicated his life to his work, keeping himself at a careful distance from emotional entanglements. But standing in the morning sunlight beside this remarkable woman, he felt those carefully constructed walls beginning to shift. They made their way to Henderson's Fine Garments, a respectable establishment housed in a 3-story building on Market Street. The shop occupied the ground floor, with workrooms above where seamstresses and tailors plied their trade. The proprietor, a fastidious man named Marcus Henderson, greeted them with cautious courtesy. "Yes, I remember Margaret Morrison," he said when William explained the purpose of their visit. "She worked here for nearly 3 years before her death. Exceptional craftswoman, absolutely exceptional. I was devastated to lose her." He led them upstairs to the workroom where half a dozen women sat at tables, their needles moving with practiced precision. An older woman with silver hair looked up as they entered, and recognition sparked in her eyes. "Mr. Henderson, are these people asking about Margaret?" she called out, setting aside her work. The proprietor nodded. Mrs. Callahan was Margaret's supervisor. She knew her better than anyone here. Mrs. Callahan rose and approached them, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 60 years old, with kind eyes that held the wisdom of long experience. "Margaret Morrison was like a daughter to me. Her death broke my heart. What do you want to know about her?" William introduced himself and Evelyn, then asked, "Did Margaret ever speak to you about her past? About her family or where she came from?" Mrs. Callahan shook her head slowly. "She was a closed book about such things, but I could tell she came from quality folk. The way she spoke, the way she carried herself, it wasn't common. I always suspected she was running from something or someone." "Did she have any visitors here?" Evelyn asked. "Anyone who came looking for her?" The older woman's expression darkened. "About a week before she died, a man came to the shop. Tall fellow, perhaps 40 years old, with a cold manner about him. He asked to speak with Margaret privately. I allowed it, though I regret that now. When he left, Margaret was white as a sheet, trembling. She wouldn't tell me what he wanted, but she begged me not to tell anyone he had been there." William exchanged a meaningful glance with Evelyn. "Can you describe this man more specifically? Any distinguishing features?" Mrs. Callahan thought carefully. "He wore expensive clothes, carried a gold-headed walking stick. He had a scar on his left hand, between the thumb and forefinger. I noticed it when he removed his gloves, and his eyes were pale blue, almost colorless. They made me uncomfortable." William made detailed notes while Evelyn asked, "Did Margaret leave anything behind when she died? Personal effects, papers, anything that might tell us more about her?" "There's a box in the storage room," Mrs. Callahan said. "Margaret asked me to keep it safe, said it contained things for Catherine when she grew older. I've been holding on to it all these years, waiting for the right time to send it to the orphanage. Perhaps now is that time." She disappeared into the back of the workroom and returned carrying a modest wooden box, perhaps 12 inches square. She handed it to William with reverent care. "Margaret made me promise that only Catherine should open this when she was old enough to understand. But given what you're investigating, perhaps it contains information that could help." William accepted the box, feeling its weight in his hands. "We'll respect Margaret's wishes, Mrs. Callahan. Catherine will be present when we open this." They thanked the seamstress and left the shop, the mysterious box adding another layer to the growing puzzle. As they walked back toward William's office, Evelyn said quietly, "The man Mrs. Callahan described sounds like someone with authority, someone accustomed to getting what he wants." "Agreed," William replied. "And the timing of his visit, just days before Margaret's death, cannot be coincidental. We need to identify him." Back at the office, William carefully set the box on his desk alongside the letters and photograph. He and Evelyn stood side by side, studying the collection of clues that represented Margaret Morrison's hidden life. "Detective Hartford," Evelyn said softly, "I have a confession to make. I've been investigating Margaret's death privately for years, in whatever spare time I could find. I always believed there was more to her story than a simple case of influenza." William turned to look at her, surprised but intrigued. "What have you discovered?" Evelyn pulled a folded newspaper clipping from her handbag. "This obituary appeared in the Boston Herald in March 1892, just weeks before the first letter from Jonathan Whitfield. It announces the death of Helena Ashworth and mentions that she is survived by a granddaughter, location unknown. But here's what's interesting. The obituary was placed by someone named Richard Ashworth, identified as Mrs. Ashworth's nephew. William took the clipping and read it carefully. So there was another family member, someone who might have had a vested interest in preventing Margaret from claiming her inheritance. Exactly, Evelyn said. And I did more digging. Richard Ashworth was a businessman in Boston, involved in shipping and trade. But in 1893, just a year after Helena Ashworth's death, his business collapsed under mysterious circumstances. He fled Boston to avoid creditors and was never seen again. William felt pieces of the puzzle beginning to connect in his mind. If Richard Ashworth was expecting to inherit his aunt's estate, only to discover she had left everything to Margaret, he would have had every reason to prevent Margaret from claiming it. But how did he find her in Philadelphia? That's what we need to discover, Evelyn replied. And we need to determine if his visit to Margaret was connected to her death. As the afternoon wore on, William and Evelyn continued their investigation, visiting the boarding house on Pine Street and speaking with remaining residents who remembered Margaret. Each conversation added small details to their understanding, painting a picture of a woman who had been both gentle and haunted, loving with her daughter, but always looking over her shoulder. When evening approached, William walked Evelyn to the corner where she could catch a streetcar home. The autumn air was crisp and clean after the previous night's rain, and the gas lights were beginning to flicker to life along the street. Miss Carter, William said as they waited, I want to thank you for your assistance today. Your dedication to Catherine and to Margaret's memory is admirable. Evelyn smiled, and in the soft evening light, William noticed details he had missed earlier. The delicate curve of her jaw, the intelligent sparkling in her brown eyes, the way her smile transformed her entire face. Please, call me Evelyn. If we're going to be working together closely, formality seems unnecessary. Then you must call me William, he replied, surprised by how much he wanted to hear his name from her lips. She looked at him with an expression that held both warmth and something more tentative. William, I must admit, I've heard of your reputation as an investigator. They say you're brilliant but solitary, that you trust no one and work alone. Yet today, you've shared this investigation with me completely. May I ask why? William considered the question carefully, searching for honesty within himself. Because from the moment you walked into my office this morning, I knew you understood what this case truly means. It's not just about solving a mystery or uncovering a crime. It's about giving a little girl back her mother's story, about restoring dignity to a woman who died believing herself forgotten and alone. That requires not just an investigator, but someone with compassion. And you, Evelyn Carter, possess both qualities in abundance. He saw color rise in her cheeks, and she looked away briefly before meeting his gaze again. You may find, William Hartford, that you possess more compassion than you credit yourself with. The streetcar arrived with the clanging of its bell, and Evelyn prepared to board. Before she did, she turned back to him. Tomorrow we visit Catherine and open that box together. Whatever we find, we face it as partners. Agreed? Agreed, William said, and as he watched the streetcar carry her away into the gathering dusk, he felt something shift in his chest, a warmth he hadn't experienced in longer than he could remember. This case had brought him more than a mystery to solve. It had brought him Evelyn Carter, and he was beginning to realize that she might change everything. The morning sun cast long shadows through the tall windows of St. Margaret's orphanage as William and Evelyn arrived carrying the wooden box that had once belonged to Margaret Morrison. Mother Superior Teresa, a woman of perhaps 50 years with gentle eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, greeted them in the modest reception hall where religious paintings adorned the whitewashed walls. Detective Hartford, Miss Carter, Catherine has spoken of little else since your visit, the Mother Superior said, her voice carrying the soft lilt of an Irish accent. The child barely slept last night. She's been waiting in the study since dawn. William felt a weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. We may be about to reveal truths that will change Catherine's understanding of her mother and herself. I want to ensure she's prepared for whatever we might discover. Mother Superior Teresa nodded with understanding. Catherine Rose is stronger than she appears, Detective. She has the resilience of a child who has already faced loss and emerged with her spirit intact. But I'll remain present during your conversation, if that's acceptable. Of course, Evelyn said warmly. Your support will be invaluable to her. They were led down a corridor lined with children's artwork to a small study where Catherine sat at a wooden table, her hands folded neatly before her. She wore a simple gray dress that marked her as one of the orphanage's charges, but her posture was straight and her green eyes blazed with anticipation. The moment she saw William and the box he carried, she rose from her chair. "Detective Hartford, you came," she said, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "I was afraid you might have changed your mind." William set the box gently on the table and took the seat across from her. Evelyn settled beside him while Mother Superior Teresa stood nearby, her rosary beads clicking softly in her hands. "I gave you my word, Catherine, and I always keep my word." He gestured to Evelyn. "This is Miss Evelyn Carter. She knew your mother and has been helping me investigate what happened to her." Catherine's eyes widened as she looked at Evelyn. "You knew my mother? Really knew her?" Evelyn reached across the table and took the girl's small hand in hers. "I did, Catherine. Your mother was a remarkable woman, kind and talented and deeply devoted to you. Everything she did was to protect you and give you the best life she could manage." Tears welled in Catherine's eyes. "I remember she used to sing to me. Sometimes I dream about her voice, but when I wake up, I can't quite recall the melody. She sang like an angel," Evelyn said softly. "I heard her many times at the boarding house, lullabies and old ballads. You have her eyes, you know. That same brilliant green." William cleared his throat gently, drawing their attention back to the matter at hand. "Catherine, we've made some discoveries about your mother that I need to share with you. But first, there's this box. Your mother left it with a woman named Mrs. Callahan, who worked with her at Henderson's Fine Garments. She asked that it be given to you when you were old enough to understand. With your permission, I think now is the time to open it." Catherine stared at the box as though it were a sacred object, her small fingers trembling as she reached toward it. "My mother touched this. She held it in her hands." "She did," William confirmed, "and she wanted you to have what's inside. Shall we look together?" The girl nodded, unable to speak. William carefully lifted the lid, revealing the contents that had been preserved for 6 years. On top lay a folded letter, the paper aged but still intact. Beneath it were several personal items: a small silver locket, a pressed flower preserved between sheets of glass, a silk handkerchief embroidered with delicate roses, and a leather-bound journal. William lifted the letter and saw that it was addressed in Margaret's elegant handwriting. "To my beloved Catherine, when you are old enough to understand." He handed it to the girl with reverent care. Catherine's hands shook as she unfolded the letter. Her eyes scanned the words and tears began to stream down her cheeks. In a voice barely above a whisper, she read aloud, "My dearest Catherine, if you are reading this, then I am no longer with you, and my heart breaks knowing I could not watch you grow into the remarkable woman I know you will become. There is so much I must tell you, so many truths I have kept hidden to protect you. My darling girl, you come from a family of dignity and standing, though I was forced to leave them behind long ago. My name was not always Margaret Morrison. I was born Margaret Rose Ashworth, granddaughter of Helena Ashworth of Boston. My mother died when I was young, and I was raised by my grandmother in a beautiful house on Beacon Hill. But when I was 18 years old, I fell in love with a young artist named Thomas Morrison, a man my grandmother's nephew, Richard Ashworth, deemed unsuitable for our family station. Richard controlled much of my grandmother's affairs, and he was determined that I should marry a wealthy industrialist friend of his, a cruel man I could never love. When I refused, Richard became threatening. Your father and I eloped one autumn night in 1891, but our happiness was short-lived. Thomas was killed in a carriage accident just 3 months into our marriage, and I discovered I was carrying you. I knew Richard would try to take you from me, to raise you under his control, so I fled Boston with nothing but the clothes on my back and my mother's maiden name. I came to Philadelphia and tried to build a life for us, always looking over my shoulder, always afraid Richard would find us. If you are reading this, my darling, then my fears may have been realized. There is an inheritance that should be yours, property and funds left to me by my grandmother. I never claimed it because doing so would have revealed my location to Richard. But you, my brave girl, deserve what is rightfully yours. Seek out a lawyer named Jonathan Whitfield in Boston. Tell him who you are. The locket contains a photograph of your father, the only image I have of him. Remember that you were conceived in love, born into love, and that every moment I had with you was the greatest joy of my life. Be strong, be brave, and know that I will always watch over you. Your loving mother, Margaret Rose Ashworth Morrison. Silence filled the small study as Catherine finished reading. The girl clutched the letter to her chest, her body shaking with silent sobs. Evelyn moved quickly to embrace her, holding the child as she wept for the mother she had lost and the truth she had finally received. William felt his throat tighten with emotion. He reached for the locket and opened it carefully. Inside was indeed a photograph of a young man, perhaps 25 years old, with kind eyes and an artist's sensitive features. This was Thomas Morrison, Catherine's father, a man who had loved Margaret enough to defy convention and who had died before he could know his daughter. Mother Superior Teresa stepped forward and placed a comforting hand on Catherine's shoulder. "Your mother was protecting you the only way she knew how, child. She sacrificed everything so you could be safe." Catherine looked up, her face wet with tears, but her eyes burning with determination that reminded William powerfully of her mother. "Detective Hartford, Miss Carter. My mother's letter suggests she feared Richard Ashworth. Do you think he found her? Do you think he had something to do with her death?" William chose his words carefully. "Catherine, we have evidence that a man matching Richard Ashworth's description visited your mother shortly before she died. We believe he was searching for her and that he may have prevented her from receiving letters about her inheritance. But we don't yet have proof of anything more serious." "Then we must find proof," Catherine said with fierce resolve. "My mother lived in fear for years because of him. She died alone and afraid. I want justice for her, Detective Hartford. I want the truth, no matter how painful it might be." William looked at this remarkable child and saw not just Margaret's green eyes, but her courage as well. "You'll have it, Catherine. I promise you that." Evelyn gently released Catherine and picked up the leather-bound journal from the box. "May I?" she asked, and when Catherine nodded, she opened it carefully. The pages were filled with Margaret's elegant handwriting, entries dating back to 1891. Evelyn began reading selected passages aloud, and a fuller picture of Margaret's life emerged. The journal detailed Margaret's romance with Thomas Morrison, their secret meetings in Boston's public garden, their dreams of a life together free from her family's constraints. It spoke of her grandmother Helena's kind heart and her sadness that the old woman was so influenced by Richard's counsel. After Thomas's death, the entries became darker, filled with grief and fear. Margaret described fleeing Boston on a rainy November night, carrying nothing but a small bag of belongings and the knowledge that she was pregnant. The entries from Philadelphia were sparse but poignant, documenting Catherine's birth, her first words, her first steps. Margaret wrote of working long hours as a seamstress, of the constant worry that Richard would find them, of her determination to give her daughter a better life than the one she had been forced into. The final entries, written just weeks before her death, revealed her growing terror. "He's found me," one entry read. "I saw a man watching the boarding house yesterday. I recognized him as one of Richard's associates from Boston. I must be more careful. I must protect Catherine at all costs." The last entry, dated 2 days before Margaret's death, was barely legible, as though written in great haste and distress. "Richard came today. He knows everything. He demanded I sign papers renouncing my claim to grandmother's estate, threatened to have Catherine taken from me if I refused. I sent him away, but I fear what he might do. If anything happens to me, I pray someone will protect my daughter from him. The letters from Mr. Whitfield are hidden at the orphanage. I managed to retrieve them from Richard's possession, but I have no strength left to act on them. God forgive me. I have failed my daughter." William stood abruptly, his hands clenched into fists. Richard Ashworth stole those letters before Margaret ever saw them. He kept them from her, then came to threaten her when he realized she might still learn of the inheritance through other means, and then she died, conveniently, just 2 days after his visit. Evelyn's face had gone pale. "William, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that Margaret Morrison didn't die of natural causes," William said grimly. "I'm suggesting she was murdered to prevent her from claiming an inheritance that Richard Ashworth wanted for himself." Catherine had stopped crying, her small face set in lines of grim determination beyond her years. "Can you prove it, Detective Hartford? Can you prove that Richard Ashworth killed my mother?" William met her gaze steadily. "I can try, Catherine, but it won't be easy. 6 years have passed, and Richard Ashworth has disappeared. However, there may still be evidence, still be witnesses who remember what happened." Mother Superior Teresa spoke up, her voice troubled. "Detective, if what you suspect is true, then this child may still be in danger. If Richard Ashworth killed once to protect his interests, he might do so again, which is why Catherine must remain here, safe within these walls, while Miss Carter and I continue our investigation," William said firmly. "And Mother Superior, I must ask that you allow no visitors to see Catherine without explicit permission from myself or Miss Carter. Trust no one, no matter how respectable they may appear." The nun nodded gravely. "I understand. Catherine will be protected. You have my word." Evelyn gathered the items from the box carefully, preparing to take them as evidence. As she did, Catherine suddenly spoke up. "Detective Hartford, there's something else. Something I didn't mention when I first came to your office." William turned to her with sharp attention. "What is it, Catherine?" The girl reached into the pocket of her dress and withdrew a small brass key. "I found this with the letters, hidden in the same place behind the loose board. There's an inscription on it, but I don't know what it means." William took the key and examined it closely. It was old, but well made, and engraved along its length were the words, "Boston Safe Deposit, Box 127. His heart began to race as he understood the significance. "Your mother had a safe deposit box in Boston," he said slowly. "This key could unlock evidence she preserved, documents or items that might prove what Richard Ashworth did." Evelyn moved to his side, studying the key with growing excitement. "William, if Margaret managed to secure evidence before she died, if she left proof of Richard's threats or his theft of the letters, we could build a case against him. Then we go to Boston," William declared. "Tomorrow morning we take the first train north. We'll visit Jonathan Whitfield's law office, access that safe deposit box, and find out once and for all what happened to Margaret Morrison and why." Catherine rose from her chair and moved to stand before William. Despite her small stature, there was something regal about her bearing in that moment, something that spoke of the Ashworth blood flowing through her veins. "Detective Hartford, Miss Carter, I cannot thank you enough for what you're doing for me and for my mother's memory, but I need to ask one more thing of you." "Anything," William said without hesitation. "When you find Richard Ashworth, when you prove what he did, I want to face him," Catherine said, her voice steady and clear. "I want him to look into my eyes and see the daughter of the woman he destroyed. I want him to know that he didn't win, that my mother's love was stronger than his cruelty." William placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "When the time comes, if it's safe and appropriate, I'll make sure you have that opportunity. Your mother's courage lives on in you, Catherine Rose Morrison. Never forget that." As they prepared to leave the orphanage, William found himself walking beside Evelyn through the corridor. She had been quiet since reading Margaret's journal, and he could see the weight of emotion in her expression. "Evelyn," he said softly, causing her to pause and look up at him. "Are you all right?" She smiled sadly. "I knew Margaret was carrying secrets, but I never imagined the depth of what she endured. To lose her husband, to flee her home, to live in constant fear for her daughter's safety, and then to die just when she might have found some measure of security. It's heartbreaking, William." He found himself reaching for her hand, an impulsive gesture that surprised them both. But she didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers intertwined with his, and they stood together in the quiet corridor. Two people bound by a shared mission and something deeper that neither had quite named yet. "We'll get justice for her," William said. "For Margaret and for Catherine, I swear it." "I know we will," Evelyn replied, "because we're doing this together, and together we're stronger than any secret Richard Ashworth tried to bury." They left the orphanage as the afternoon sun painted Philadelphia's streets in shades of gold and amber. Tomorrow they would board a train for Boston, would venture into the past to uncover truths that had been hidden for years. But in this moment, walking side by side through the bustling city, William Hartford felt something he hadn't experienced in longer than he could remember. Hope, not just for solving a case, but for something more personal. Something that had to do with the remarkable woman whose hand still rested trustingly in his. That evening, as William prepared for the journey ahead, he found himself studying Margaret's photograph once more. Those green eyes that had haunted him from the first moment seemed to hold a different message now. Not a plea for help, but a blessing, an approval of the path he and Evelyn were walking together. Margaret had known love, had sacrificed everything for it, and had died believing in its power. William carefully packed the evidence they had gathered, including the precious key that might unlock the final truths. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new revelations, and he suspected new dangers. But he was ready to face them, especially knowing that Evelyn Carter would be at his side, her courage and compassion a constant source of strength. As he extinguished the lamp in his office and prepared to leave for the night, William made a silent promise to the woman in the photograph, to Margaret Rose Ashworth Morrison, who had loved so deeply and lost so much. He would uncover the truth about her death, would secure justice for her daughter, and would ensure that her story, her sacrifice, and her love would not be forgotten. The adventure was only beginning, but William Hartford felt certain of one thing. By the time it ended, nothing in his carefully ordered life would remain the same, and he was discovering that the prospect didn't frighten him at all. The train to Boston departed Philadelphia's Broad Street station at dawn, its steam whistle piercing the early morning fog as it pulled away from the platform. William and Evelyn sat together in a first-class compartment, the rhythmic clacking of wheels on rails providing a steady backdrop to their quiet conversation. Through the window, the Pennsylvania countryside rolled past in shades of autumn gold and russet, forests giving way to small towns and back again in endless progression. Evelyn had dressed for the journey in a practical traveling suit of deep blue, her chestnut hair secured beneath a modest hat. She held Margaret's journal on her lap, occasionally reading passages aloud as they discussed their strategy for the day ahead. William found himself studying her profile as she read, noting the determination in her expression, the intelligence in her eyes, the way her voice softened when she spoke of Margaret's love for Catherine. "Listen to this entry," Evelyn said, her finger tracing along a page. Margaret writes, "I saw a woman today with her husband and daughter walking through Rittenhouse Square. They were laughing together, so carefree and happy. I wonder if Thomas and I could have had such a life, if fate had been kinder. But I cannot regret Catherine's existence, not even for a moment. She is the light that keeps darkness at bay, the reason I continue to fight even when I am weary beyond measure." William felt his throat tighten. Margaret possessed extraordinary strength to endure so much and still maintain such devotion to her daughter. "She reminds me of many women I've worked with," Evelyn said softly, closing the journal. "Women who sacrifice everything for their children, who find courage they never knew they possessed because love demands it of them." She turned to face him fully, and William saw something vulnerable in her expression. "William, may I ask you something personal?" "Of course," he replied, surprised by how much he wanted to share with her, to let down the walls he had maintained for so many years. "What drew you to investigative work? What made you dedicate your life to uncovering truths for others?" William was quiet for a moment, watching the landscape blur past. "My father was a police officer in Philadelphia, an honest man in a profession that often rewarded dishonesty. When I was 15 years old, he uncovered corruption in his precinct, evidence that several officers were taking bribes from criminal enterprises. He reported it to his superiors, believing he was doing the right thing." He paused, old pain flickering across his features. 3 days later, he was killed during what was officially ruled a robbery gone wrong. But I knew even then that it was murder, a message to anyone who might consider following his example. The investigation was cursory, the case quickly closed. No one wanted to look too deeply, to ask uncomfortable questions. Evelyn reached out and placed her hand over his. "William, I'm so sorry. I became an investigator because I couldn't become a police officer." William continued, his voice steady despite the emotion beneath it. "I couldn't work within a system that had betrayed my father. But I could work outside it, could help people who had nowhere else to turn, who needed someone willing to pursue truth regardless of where it led. Every case I solve, every person I help, it's a way of honoring my father's memory and the principles he died defending." Evelyn squeezed his hand gently. "Your father would be proud of the man you've become, William Hartford. I'm certain of that." He turned his hand beneath hers so their palms met, their fingers intertwining naturally. "And what of you, Evelyn? You mentioned being orphaned at 12, but there must be more to your story." A shadow passed over her face, but she didn't pull away from his touch. "My parents died in a fire at our home in Baltimore. I was at school when it happened. By the time I returned, there was nothing left but ashes and memories. My Aunt Clara took me in, gave me a home and an education, but she couldn't give me back what I had lost." Her voice grew stronger, more resolute. "For years, I was angry at the world, at fate, at God for taking them from me. But then I began working with orphaned children, and I saw my own pain reflected in their eyes. I realized that while I couldn't change my past, I could help shape their futures. Every child I help find a home, every life I make even slightly better, it transforms my loss into something meaningful." William raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently, a gesture that felt both natural and profound. "We're more alike than I realized, Evelyn Carter. Both of us trying to create light from darkness, both of us fighting for those who cannot fight for themselves." She smiled, and something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that went beyond words. The compartment door opened suddenly, breaking the spell, as the conductor passed through, calling out, "Boston in 30 minutes. South Station, 30 minutes." They gathered their belongings and prepared for arrival, but the intimacy they had shared lingered in the air between them. William felt as though he were standing at a precipice, about to step into something that would change his life forever, and the prospect filled him with equal parts anticipation and trepidation. South Station was bustling with activity when they disembarked, a grand Beaux-Arts structure that spoke to Boston's wealth and importance. They secured a hansom cab and directed the driver to the offices of Whitfield and Associates on State Street, in the heart of the financial district. The law firm occupied the third floor of an imposing granite building. The reception area was furnished with dark wood and leather, exuding an atmosphere of dignified prosperity. A clerk informed them that Jonathan Whitfield, though retired from active practice, still maintained an office and came in several days a week. By fortunate coincidence, this was one of those days. Jonathan Whitfield proved to be a distinguished gentleman of perhaps 70 years, with silver hair and keen blue eyes that missed nothing. He received them in his book-lined office with courteous curiosity that turned to intense interest when William explained the purpose of their visit. "Margaret Rose Ashworth," Whitfield said slowly, settling back in his chair. "My God, I searched for that young woman for months. Her grandmother, Helena, was one of my dearest clients and friends. When she died and left everything to Margaret, I felt duty-bound to find her, to ensure she received what was rightfully hers." "But you never found her," William said. It was a statement, not a question. Whitfield shook his head sadly. "The letters I sent were returned unopened or simply vanished into the void. I hired investigators, contacted every Morrison family in New England, but it was as though Margaret had disappeared from the face of the earth. Eventually, after the 30-day period specified in Helena's will expired, the estate passed to the alternate beneficiary named in the documents." "Richard Ashworth," Evelyn said. The lawyer's expression darkened. "Yes, Richard Ashworth, Helena's nephew. I never trusted that man, and Helena had her doubts about him as well. But she was elderly and unwell, and Richard had insinuated himself into her affairs over the years. She changed her will 3 times in the final year of her life. The first version left everything to Richard. The second left everything to Margaret. The third, executed just weeks before her death, left the estate to Margaret but with Richard as alternate beneficiary if Margaret could not be located within 30 days. William leaned forward intently. "Mr. Whitfield, do you believe Richard Ashworth had access to Helena's correspondence during her final years?" The lawyer's eyes sharpened with understanding. "You think he intercepted my letters to Margaret?" "Yes, Detective Hartford, I believe he very well could have. Richard was often at Helena's home, helping manage her affairs. He would have known about the will change, would have known I was trying to locate Margaret. And if Margaret never received the letters, never came forward to claim the inheritance," Evelyn said, "then after 30 days, everything would pass to Richard." "Precisely," Whitfield confirmed. "The estate was considerable. The Beacon Hill property, investment portfolios, bank accounts. Richard Ashworth gained approximately $300,000 when Margaret failed to appear." William withdrew the brass key from his pocket and placed it on the desk. "Mr. Whitfield, we found this among Margaret's possessions. It's for a safe deposit box at Boston Safe Deposit. We believe Margaret may have secured evidence there before her death. Would you be willing to accompany us to access it?" Whitfield picked up the key, examining it closely. "As the executor of Helena Ashworth's estate, I have legal standing to access Margaret's property, particularly if there's reason to believe it contains documents relevant to the inheritance." "Yes, Detective Hartford. I'll accompany you. And if we find what I suspect we might find, Richard Ashworth will finally face justice for his crimes." The Boston Safe Deposit Company was a fortress-like building on Milk Street, designed to inspire confidence in its security. The manager, a fastidious man named Mr. Pemberton, initially resisted their request, but Whitfield's legal credentials and commanding presence eventually won the day. They were escorted to the vault, a massive space lined with hundreds of numbered boxes. Box 127 was located in a corner section. Mr. Pemberton used his master key in combination with Margaret's key to open it. Inside was a leather document folder, preserved perfectly in the climate-controlled environment. William lifted it out with careful hands, and they were directed to a private viewing room where they could examine the contents. The folder contained several items that made William's heart race with the thrill of discovery. First was a copy of Helena Ashworth's will, the version leaving everything to Margaret. Second was a series of letters from Helena to Margaret, written over several years, expressing her love for her granddaughter and her regret that Richard's interference had driven Margaret away. Third, and most damning, were 2 letters in Richard Ashworth's own hand. The first letter, dated just after Helena's death, was addressed to an associate and detailed Richard's plan to intercept any correspondence from Whitfield's law firm to Margaret. She must not learn of the inheritance until the 30-day period has expired, Richard had written. Ensure that any letters reaching the Philadelphia address are redirected to my attention. The girl is foolish and idealistic. She'll never think to inquire about her grandmother's estate on her own. The second letter, dated 2 days before Margaret's death, was even more chilling. It was addressed to someone named Dr. Thaddeus Gray and contained instructions that made William's blood run cold. The Morrison woman has proven more troublesome than anticipated. She somehow retrieved my copies of Whitfield's letters and threatens to expose everything. You know what must be done. Make it appear natural. Influenza is rampant in Philadelphia this season. No one will question another death from disease. Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth. Dear God, William, he ordered her murder. He actually put it in writing. Whitfield's face had gone ashen. This is evidence of conspiracy to commit murder. Dr. Thaddeus Gray was a disreputable physician who lost his license in Boston several years ago for unethical practices. If Richard hired him to kill Margaret, we have grounds for prosecution. William was already on his feet, his mind racing through implications. Mr. Whitfield, we need to find Richard Ashworth immediately, and we need to determine if this Dr. Gray is still in Philadelphia. If he administered something to Margaret that caused her death, if he's still practicing under a false name, he's a danger to others. I can help with that, Whitfield said, his voice firm with determination. I have contacts in the police department here in Boston and in Philadelphia. We can issue warrants, begin searching for both men. They spent the next several hours in a flurry of activity. Whitfield sent telegrams to his contacts while William and Evelyn returned to State Street to make copies of the incriminating documents. By late afternoon, they had set in motion a coordinated effort to locate Richard Ashworth and Dr. Thaddeus Gray. As evening fell over Boston, William and Evelyn found themselves walking along the Charles River, needing a moment of peace after the intensity of the day. The water reflected the dying light of sunset, and the air carried the crisp promise of winter approaching. We did it, Evelyn said softly. We found proof of what Richard Ashworth did to Margaret. Catherine will have justice for her mother. We're not finished yet, William replied. We still need to locate Ashworth and Gray, need to see them brought to trial. But yes, we've accomplished what we set out to do. He stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. Evelyn, I need to tell you something. This case, working alongside you, has shown me what I've been missing all these years. I've kept myself isolated, believing that solitude was necessary for my work, that emotional connections would compromise my objectivity. Evelyn's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she listened. William, but you've proven me wrong, he continued, his voice filled with emotion he no longer tried to hide. Your compassion doesn't weaken your resolve, it strengthens it. Your ability to care deeply doesn't cloud your judgment, it sharpens it. You've reminded me that justice isn't just about solving puzzles and catching criminals. It's about healing wounds, about restoring what was taken, about giving people back their stories and their dignity. He pulled her closer, and she came willingly, her hands rising to rest against his chest. Evelyn Carter, somewhere between that rainy evening when Catherine walked into my office and this moment, I've fallen in love with you. I didn't plan it, didn't expect it, but I cannot deny it any longer. Tears spilled down Evelyn's cheeks, but her smile was radiant. William Hartford, I fell in love with you the moment you took that frightened child's hand and promised her the truth. You are the most honorable man I've ever known, and I cannot imagine facing the future without you beside me. He kissed her then, gently at first, and then with growing passion, and Evelyn responded with equal fervor. They stood on the riverbank as darkness fell around them, two souls who had found each other through tragedy and emerged into something beautiful and true. A telegram was waiting for them when they returned to their hotel. Whitfield had news. Richard Ashworth had been located in New York City, living under an assumed name but identified through financial records. Police were moving to arrest him. Additionally, a Dr. Thomas Gray, matching the description of the disreputable Thaddeus Gray, had been found practicing in a poor section of Philadelphia under questionable circumstances. He too was being taken into custody. 3 days later, William, Evelyn, and Jonathan Whitfield stood in a Philadelphia courtroom as formal charges were read against Richard Ashworth and Thomas Gray. The evidence was overwhelming, and both men, faced with the prospect of lengthy trials and certain conviction, agreed to provide full confessions in exchange for consideration. Richard Ashworth, now 52 years old and bearing little resemblance to the powerful man he had once been, admitted to intercepting Whitfield's letters, to threatening Margaret, and to hiring Gray to administer a fatal dose of poison that mimicked the symptoms of influenza. Gray corroborated every detail, explaining how he had visited Margaret at the boarding house posing as a doctor making rounds during the epidemic, how he had given her what he claimed was medicine but was actually a carefully prepared toxin. Catherine was present in the courtroom, seated between Mother Superior Teresa and Mrs. Callahan from Henderson's Fine Garments. When Richard Ashworth was asked if he had anything to say, the girl stood up with quiet dignity. "Mr. Ashworth," she said, her voice clear and steady, "I want you to look at me. I am Catherine Rose Morrison, daughter of Margaret Rose Ashworth Morrison, granddaughter of Helena Ashworth, and great-granddaughter of the family you dishonored with your greed. My mother died believing herself alone and powerless, but she was wrong. Her love made me strong, and her courage lives on in me. You took her life, but you did not destroy her legacy. I am that legacy, and I will ensure that her story is remembered and honored." Richard Ashworth stared at the girl, and something crumbled in his expression. For the first time, genuine remorse seemed to touch his features. "I am sorry," he whispered. "God forgive me. I am truly sorry." "I cannot forgive you," Catherine replied, "but perhaps in time I can find peace knowing that my mother's death has been answered with justice." The judge sentenced both men to lengthy prison terms. Richard Ashworth would spend the remainder of his life incarcerated, while Thomas Gray received 30 years. The stolen inheritance was restored to Catherine, placed in trust until she reached majority. Jonathan Whitfield agreed to serve as trustee, ensuring that Margaret's daughter would have every advantage that should have been hers from birth. 2 months later, on a crisp December morning, William Hartford and Evelyn Carter stood before a minister in a small church in Philadelphia. Catherine served as Evelyn's attendant, wearing a new dress purchased with the first disbursement from her trust fund. Jonathan Whitfield had traveled from Boston to attend, as had Mrs. Callahan and many of the sisters from St. Margaret's Orphanage. As William slipped a simple gold band onto Evelyn's finger, he thought of Margaret Morrison and the love she had cherished despite impossible odds. He thought of his father, who had died defending truth, and of all the broken paths that had led him to this moment. Evelyn smiled at him through happy tears, and he knew with absolute certainty that he had found his purpose, not just in seeking justice for others, but in building a life with this remarkable woman who had shown him that love and justice were not opposing forces, but complementary truths. They had decided to adopt Catherine, to give her the family she deserved. The paperwork was already being processed, and soon Catherine Rose Morrison would become Catherine Rose Hartford, daughter not just of Margaret's body, but of William and Evelyn's hearts. After the ceremony, as wedding guests celebrated in the church hall, William stepped outside for a moment of quiet reflection. Evelyn joined him on the steps, slipping her hand into his with the easy familiarity of two people who belonged together. "What are you thinking?" she asked softly. William looked up at the clear winter sky, at stars beginning to appear as twilight descended. "I'm thinking that Margaret Morrison's final act was to bring us together. Her letter, her courage in preserving evidence, her love for Catherine, all of it led to this moment. She lost so much, but through her sacrifice others have gained everything. Do you think she can see us?" Evelyn wondered, her voice wistful. "Do you think she knows that Catherine is safe and loved, that justice was served, that her story ended not with tragedy, but with hope?" "I think," William said, pulling his wife close against the cold, "that love transcends death, that sacrifice is never truly wasted, and that somewhere, somehow, Margaret Morrison knows that her daughter will grow up surrounded by people who cherish her, and I think that would be enough to give her peace. Inside the church hall, Catherine's laughter rang out, bright and clear as a bell. It was the sound of a child who was no longer afraid, who knew her place in the world and her worth. It was the sound of healing, of justice fulfilled, of love triumphant over darkness. William and Evelyn returned inside to join the celebration, to begin their new life together as partners in every sense of the word. They would continue their work, he as an investigator and she as an advocate, fighting for those who could not fight for themselves. But they would do it together now, stronger as a unit than either had ever been alone. And in the years that followed, when Catherine asked about her mother, they would tell her the truth, that Margaret Rose Ashworth Morrison had been a woman of extraordinary courage, that she had loved deeply and sacrificed everything for her daughter, and that her final gift had been not just justice but family, bringing together three souls who were meant to walk through life as one. The case that had begun with a small girl asking, "Do you know my mom?" had ended with that same girl surrounded by love, with truth revealed, with justice served, and with the promise of a future bright with possibility. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the stars shone bright over Philadelphia, Catherine would stand at her window and whisper thanks to the mother she could barely remember, but would never forget, knowing that Margaret's love had guided her to exactly where she was meant to be.